Fitchburg Public Library. And I want to tell you that this is the third in a series of 12 ethnic heritage programs that are being held at the library and at the State College, sponsored by the National Endowment for the Humanities. This program is just part of a larger project funded by the National Endowment involving a number of organizations and institutions and individuals in the community, and I'd like to identify them for you before we start the program. First of all, playing a very large role is the Fitchburg State College, with several of its faculty, including Dr. Granger Browning, who is the program coordinator for the project, Dr. David Ryder, who is the media consultant, and Gunther Hoos, who is doing the videotape today with his wife Barbara on the left-hand side toward the garden. They will be working along with David Ryder on the slide programs for each of the groups, so that you want to look for those as well. In addition, the project is being assisted by the Fitchburg Historical Society, which is working with each of the local committees, and Eleanor West, the curator, is the key person working for the Historical Society and the project. In addition, we have working with us once again Dr. Margaret Kelty, who is the community coordinator for the ethnic heritage programs at the library and is serving on the coordinating committee of this particular project. But perhaps more importantly, in each case, is the local committee working with the coordinating committee and the institutions on the project. In this case, of course, we have the Afro-American Committee. And I'm very pleased indeed today to turn the program over to its chairperson, very fine, capable person, Beverly Twine.
I again would like to say thank you for coming, and we'll begin our program now with Erica Kraft, who will accompany Leonard Gaskins in a singing part of our program. Erica Kraft will play the music as our whole gathering sings "Lift Every Voice." And now it is a distinct pleasure for me to present to you Leonard Gaskins, noted tenor, founder and director of the Leonard Gaskins Chorale, who will now sing these selections: The Crucifixion by Fisher and Motherless Child by... Oh, I'm sorry. Right now, I'd like to introduce to you Leonard Gaskins, noted tenor, founder and director of the Leonard Gaskins Chorale, who will now sing The Crucifixion by Fisher, followed by Motherless Child by Burley. Dr. Gaskins.
Wasn't that a pity and a shame? And he never said a mumbling word. They led him up to Calais bar, and he never said a mumbling word. Not a word, not a word, not a word. They led him up to Calvary's hill, and he never said a mumbling word. They nailed him to the tree, and he never said a mumbling word. Not a word, not a word, not a word. They pierced him in the side, and he never said a mumbling word. He bowed his head and died, and he never said a mumbling word. Not a word, not a word, not a word.
Thank you, Leonard Gaskins, for a beautiful presentation. Thank you, Ms. Kraft, for your lovely accompaniment. And now it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Dr. Granger Browning, who is the coordinator for the Fitchburg Mosaic.
Thank you very much, Ms. Twine. And to Ms. Twine and to the members of the Afro-American Committee and to this audience, this Fitchburg audience, which is becoming closer to the full realization of the Fitchburg Mosaic. As was mentioned, this is the third program in the Ethnic Heritage Series sponsored by the Fitchburg Public Library under a grant by the National Endowment for the Humanities. As you perhaps know, the historic springboard for this series was a book written by Doris Kirkpatrick and published by the Fitchburg Historical Society in 1975. The title of this book was Around the World in Fitchburg. And it is the hope of the members of the coordinating committee of this project whose names will appear at the back of your printed program. It is their hope that those of you who attended the first two programs in the series, those of you who are here today, and those of you who will attend the future programs, that in each program you will experience a delightful adventure as you continue this trip around the world. The first program was given February 21st, and there we got some insight into the Franco-American culture. On March 21st, we perhaps got we'll say an appreciation of the Irish culture. And today we will continue our journey with the Afro-American Committee. The title of this ethnic project is the Fitchburg Mosaic, a portrait of a city's ethnic groups. And those of us of the coordinating committee are proud that within each audience we are finding more and more elements of the mosaic, thereby enlarging the portrait and thereby also enhancing the beauty of the mosaic. One of the major purposes of the National Endowment for the Humanities was to really link the Fitchburg community with recognized scholars in ethnic culture. And this particular program this afternoon really fulfills that particular purpose. For our speaker, Dr. Charles V. Willie, Professor of Education and Urban Studies at Harvard University, is indeed a distinguished educator. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Morehouse College, and there he was a classmate of Dr. Martin Luther King. He received his master's at Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia, and he received his doctorate in sociology at Syracuse University. I really didn't intend to run down his academic background, but in that he is a sociologist, so am I, so I just couldn't let that go by. Dr. Willie, however, is also a very superb researcher. He has done research under grants from the Ford Foundation, the Spencer Foundation, the Danforth Foundation, the National Institute of Education, and the National Institute of Public Health. He is also a very prolific writer. He has written or edited over 14 books, and as a matter of fact, he wrote 3 books last year, and one of those books bears the title that he shall address this afternoon, The Black Family. So on behalf of the Fitchburg Public Library, on behalf of the Afro-American Committee, I am privileged indeed to present to you an outstanding educator and a scholar of the first magnitude, Dr. Charles V. Willie.
Thank you very much, Granger. It's a pleasure to be here in Fitchburg and participate in a program as meaningful as this one. And it has been a double joy for me to get to know the members of the Planning Committee and our gracious Madam Chairperson. But most of all, it has been a joy for me to be here and to hear the song of the black people. Sure, we are here to do some talking, and we're to do some speaking, but you don't know blacks if you don't know their songs. And today we had a magnificent expression of the song. I was just reading the Harvard Gazette that came out today that had an excerpt in there from a black preacher who was on campus to talk at one of the ceremonies that the black students in the divinity school were sponsoring. And he was saying that you can take away my instruments and you can take away this and take away that, but if you're black, they can't take away your song. And so we heard a song today that was in the tradition of the black people in the United States. It makes everyone wants to say, thank God there were black people. So I'm going to talk about the black family mirror of America, but if the spirit moves me, I might sing about black people as a mirror of America. You cannot build the city of brick and mortar and lime. It requires the sweat and the soul and the dream of a multitude. And this is the opinion of newspaper columnist Hayward Brown. I associate myself with this opinion. My aim is to discuss that portion of the multitude, the black racial minority of African ancestry that reflects both the best and the worst in the soul of this nation. If it is true that one understands oneself better by coming to know another, then it is fitting that community members should pause from time to time to reflect upon others as a way of enhancing self-understanding. The black family is discussed as a mirror of the society at large. From the point of view of blacks, Richard Wright wrote this meaningful message about the interdependence of black folk and white folk in America. He said, the common road of hope which we all have traveled has brought us into a stronger kinship than any words, laws, or legal claims. Look at us and know us, and you will know yourselves, for we are you, said Richard Wright, looking back at you from the dark mirror of our lives. The metaphor of blacks as a mirror reflecting both best and the worst in the society at large clearly is appropriate in the Fitchburg area as we discuss the ethnic heritages of this great region. When one examines the history of specific families in this area, one recognizes that there is a correlation between what has happened in the nation at large and what has happened in this region. Take the Hazard family, for example. When one examines the happenings within the Hazard household in succeeding generations, one indeed agrees with Doris Kirkpatrick that black history is intertwined with American history and Fitchburg history. There were slaves in Massachusetts before the Revolution. Not all slaves were in Virginia. The record shows that 2,000 to 3,000 of the Bay State slaves lived in such locations as Leominster, Lunenburg, and Littleton, as well as in Boston and elsewhere, and I presume in Concord. These settings also were stations of the Underground Railway and centers of abolitionist activity that assisted runaway slaves to their freedom. The first hazard of African ancestry of which there is a record was bought off a boat in Boston as a slave. Eventually he took his freedom, married a Penobscot Indian. One of the descendants of this union, Nahum G. Hazard, a long-term resident of Leominster, was born a free person in Groton in 1830, but was kidnapped by white slave traders when he was only 12 years old and sold into bondage in Virginia. Later he was rescued through the efforts of his parents, the sheriff, and the white citizens of Worcester County. In the story of the Hazards, who have lived in this area for more than a century and one half, we have a microcosm of the story of America. Blacks who were sold into slavery by some whites, and blacks who were aided to freedom by others. Nahum G. Hazard experienced both. His life is one of the dark mirrors mentioned by Richard Wright that reflects both the best and the worst in American society. Now, for years there has been a great debate over where the story of black families in America should begin, on the shore of the United States or in Africa. I did not say in a bush in Africa. Wade Nobles believes that there is parallelism between African tribalism and black family units in America. Specifically, he refers to the strong kinship bonds found in black extended families as positive functional reflections of the sense of Africanity in black communities. Yet there are many other ancient customs of African origin that seem to have no vestiges in contemporary black families in America. Particularly in West Africa, the area from which Kunta Kinte, the ancestor of Alex Haley, came, the Muslim influence was strong. A council of elders consisting only of men settled the affairs of the community when there were disputes, including disputes within families. Haley said that in Kunta's village, men could charge that their wives failed to respect them, were unduly lazy, were unwilling to make love when their turn came. In West Africa, some men had 2, 3, and 4 wives. And unless an accused wife presented a strong counter-argument, Haley said that the council of elders in Kunta Kinte's village could rule that the aggrieved husband could divorce such a wife. The husband could do this simply by setting any 3 of his wife's possessions outside her hut and then uttering toward those possessions 3 times with witnesses present these words, "I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you." Now remember, we are discussing this within the framework of whether the story of blacks should start in Africa or in America. What happened in Kunta's village is quite different from what happened in the ballad of the lovers Frankie and Johnny. A very American story about a dispute between a man and a woman who had been intimate. Johnny didn't get away with that. The absence of any semblance of the custom of supreme male authority in contemporary black families causes me to cast doubt on any hypothesis of the African origin of most cultural practices among American blacks. And I think most American black men would tell you that. Not a single one in this room tonight will try to get away with putting his wife's 3 possessions outside the hut. One important reason is the way of life of blacks in this country has been fused with the way of life of other cultures so often that it would be difficult for any distinctive or pure African custom to survive intact. Again, the Hazard family is an example. In 1974, in a 1974 research paper, Lorraine Hazard, a contemporary descendant, informed us that her family is truly an American family because it shares Indian, English, Irish, and African blood. The second important reason for doubting the African origin of most practices in the contemporary black family is the fact that, in the words of Frederick Douglass, the slave system had no interest in recognizing or preserving any of the ties that bind families together or to their homes. Indeed, Douglass describes the practice of separating mothers from their children as a marked feature of the cruelty and barbarity of the slave system. This practice interrupted a socialization process that might have perpetuated some customs of the African past. The way of life of blacks and their families in the United States today cannot be explained away by African customs. The way of life of the minority in a society is a reflection and manifestation of the way of life of the majority in that society. This is what Richard Wright meant when he said, "We are you, looking back at you from the dark mirror of our lives." Thus, the social significance of our study of black families in America is the reflection that it gives of the presence or absence of justice in the total society. The way of life of the minority is a sensitive and sure indicator. And what is the contemporary status of blacks in the United States? How are they managing in their families? A debate has emerged in recent years over whether race is declining in significance. William Wilson of the University of Chicago has claimed that talented and educated blacks are experiencing job opportunities at a rate comparable to, or in some situations exceeding, that of whites with equivalent qualifications. Others, including the U.S. Civil Rights Commission and myself, have questioned these assertions. During the bicentennial year, the U.S. Civil Rights Commission conducted a study that found, when all things were equal, including age, sex, occupation, and other characteristics, black and other minority males received an annual income that was 15 to 20 percentage points less than that received by white males. There is no ethical or just reason why black people should receive 15 to 20% less income than whites. I call this income discrepancy an unfair tax that qualified minorities pay for not being white. Income discrepancy between racial populations that otherwise are equal is institutional racism. Based on my own calculations, I discovered in the year in which this nation celebrated its 200th anniversary that blacks would have received $67.3 billion in annual income had there been no racial discrimination. Instead, blacks celebrated the bicentennial year with only $49.8 billion. They were $17.6 billion short because of race discrimination. Most of the discrimination occurred at the professional and managerial levels of employment. Such an income discrepancy persists despite the fact that the difference in median education attained by blacks and whites now is less than 3%. Back in 1940, before the Brown decision, the difference in median education between the two races was 50%. So we have closed the gap in education, but we have not closed the gap in income. Differences in lifestyles and in family customs of blacks compared to others in America probably are due to their experience of discrimination as a subdominant or less powerful population that continues to be subjected to institutional racism. These lifestyles and customs that will be described briefly have strengthened black people to endure. As such, some are worthy of emulation by others on the basis of more than a decade of research into the way of life of black families. I have published a book that is entitled A New Look at Black Families. It concludes that no longer may anyone say a black family is a black family is a black family. The population has become differentiated into the affluent, working class, and poor. About 1/3 of all black families is affluent. That is, the annual income is above the national median. About 1/3 is poor, with income below the official poverty line, and about 1/3 is working class, with income above the official poverty line but below the national median. On the basis of these and other findings, I assert that black families and white families in the United States share a common core of values, that they adapt to society and its values in different ways because of discrimination and their dominant and subdominant situations, and that the unique adaptations of racial populations are further differentiated by variations in style of life by social class. Presented as a brief description of some of these variations that have been accepted from my book, A New Look at Black Families. Let us look first at the affluent. The affluent, a middle-class population among blacks, is increasing, but it is still relatively small in size, about 1 out of every 3 black families. The public school has been an employment haven for affluent black working wives. It has provided steady and continuous work. Because of job-connected requirements, black female teachers in middle-class families may be more highly educated than their male spouses. The length of employment of professional working wives is likely to be as long as that of their husbands, with only brief interruptions for childbearing. The number of children in black middle-class families tends to be small, ranging from 1 to 3, but more often 2 or less. Thus, the black woman in a public sector job with prescribed yearly increments and retirement benefits, with only a few interruptions in her labor force status, tends to have significant earnings by the time she reaches middle age. The economic foundation for most affluent black families is a product of the cooperative work of the husband and wife. Their way of life is an illustration of a genuine team effort. Few, if any, family functions, including cooking, cleaning, and shopping, are considered to be the exclusive prerogative of the husband or the wife. Probably the best example of the liberated woman in American society is found in the wife of the black middle-class family. She and her husband have acted as partners out of necessity, and thus have carved out an equalitarian pattern of interaction in which neither husband nor wife has ultimate authority. Because of racial discrimination and the income limitations of the kinds of jobs available to blacks, the husband or wife alone could not achieve a comfortable style of life. Together they are able to make it, and this they have done. And such income as they have is lavishly spent on a home and on the education of their children. Unless restricted by racial discrimination, affluent black families tend to trade in older homes for newer structures as their earnings and savings increase. The real expense in housing, however, is in the up-to-date furnishings and modern appliances. For most affluent black families, their home is their castle, and it is outfitted as such. Because work is so consuming for the husband and wife, little time is left for socializing. Most affluent black families have nearby relatives, usually the reason for migrating to a particular city. They visit relatives occasionally, may hold membership in one or two social organizations, participate regularly in church activities, and spend the remainder of their free time in household upkeep and maintenance chores. In most affluent black families, one spouse almost always is a college graduate, often both are college graduates, who struggled and made great sacrifices to complete their formal education. Not infrequently, college and graduate school are completed on a part-time basis after adulthood and while the husband or wife, who also may be a parent, is employed full-time. Parents who have experienced these struggles and hardships know that their middle-class status, which usually is not achieved until middle age, is directly correlated with their increased education. Because education and consequently economic affluence are so closely tied together in middle-class black households, parents tend to encourage their offspring to complete schooling. And particularly do they wish their children to go on to college immediately after graduating from high school so that they will not have to struggle as long as did their parents, whom middle-class status eluded during young adult years. An ambition of most parents is to give to their children opportunities that they themselves did not have. As a starter, almost all children in affluent households are given music lessons. I won't ask the people in this group to raise your hand, but most of them had piano, they just didn't stay with it. Daughters in particular are expected to learn to play a musical instrument, usually the piano. In addition to developing musical and recreational skills, most children in affluent black families are expected to work around the house for an allowance. Most affluent blacks try to inculcate in their children positive attitudes about work and thrift. Middle-class black families in the United States manifest probably better than any other population group the Puritan orientation toward work, success, and self-reliance, so characteristic of the basic values of this nation. For them, work is a consuming experience. Little time is left for recreation and other kinds of social activities, except perhaps regular involvement in church activities. In summary, affluent or middle-class black families identify with the basic goals in American society. Family members are achievement-oriented, upwardly mobile, and equalitarian. They immerse themselves in work and have little time for leisure. Personal property, especially residential property, is a major symbol of success. This is the story of the affluent black family. And now what about the working class? Family life in the working class is a struggle for survival that requires the cooperative effort of all, husband, wife, and children. Income for black working class families range from just above the official poverty line to just below the national median. And this is hardly enough for luxury living when the family size is considered. Black working class families tend to be larger than affluent households consisting of 5 or more children. There is some indication that the size of the family is a source of pride for the parents, especially the father, maybe the mother too. The bearing and rearing of children is considered to be an important citizenship responsibility, so much so that black working class parents make great personal sacrifices for their families. They tend to look upon children as their unique contribution to society, a creative contribution they are unable to make through their work roles, which at best are semi-skilled. The size of the black working class family also may be related to the age at marriage of the parents, usually before 21 years and often during the late teens for the wife and mother. Husbands tend to assume parenthood responsibilities early too. they tend to be only 1 or 2 years older than their spouses. Cohesion in the black working class family results not so much from understanding and tenderness shown one for the other as from the joint and heroic effort to stave off adversity. Without the income of either parent or the contributions of offspring from part-time employment, the family could topple back into poverty. Parents in black working class families are literate but have limited education. Most have completed elementary school but may be high school dropouts. Seldom have any gone beyond high school. This is the educational level these parents wish their children to achieve, although some families hope that 1 or 2 of the smarter children in their brood will go on to college. Racial discrimination on the one hand and insufficient education on the other have teamed up to delimit the employment opportunities for black working class households whose mobility from rural to urban areas and from south to north usually has been in search of a better life. In general, the moves open up new opportunities and modest advancements. The northern migration has resulted in some disappointments too. On balance, new employment opportunities have resulted from the move from south to north, particularly for wives who have found work in institutional settings such as hospitals more profitable than private household work. One sacrifice that the members of black working class families have made so as to pull out of and stay beyond the clutches of poverty is to give up on doing things together as a family. Long working hours and sometimes 2 jobs leave little time for the father to interact with family members. In some households, the husband may work during the daytime and the wife during the evening hours. We call this tandem parenting. In other families, children work after school and on weekends. Such work schedules mean that the family as a unit is not able to share sometimes any meals together except possibly on Sunday, and even then you have to come out to forums. Black working class parents who boast of the fact that their children are good and have not been in trouble with the police, they also have a strong sense of morality and of clean living. The home that they may own is part of their symbol of stability and of respectability. The own home is one blessing that can be counted. It may be in a need of repair on the outside, but is always neat and clean on the inside. It is a haven from the harsh and sometimes unfriendly world. And there's little time for participation in community activities by adults in black working class families. Most spare time is devoted to associating with household members or with nearby relatives. Religion is important, but participation in church affairs is limited to regular or occasional attendance at Sunday worship services. Black working class parents do well by their children if no special problems are presented. Their comprehension of psychological maladaptation is limited. Cooperation for survival is so basic in black working class families that relationships between the husband and the wife take on an equalitarian character. Each knows that his or her destiny is dependent upon the actions of the other. Within the family, however, husbands and wives tend to have assigned roles, although in time of crisis, these roles can change. The husband tends to make decisions about financial expenditures. He also has responsibility for maintenance of the housing structure. The father is the chief advisor for the boys. The mother tends to be responsible for the cooking and cleaning. Although she may delegate these chores to the children, she is the chief advisor for the girls. She also maintains a liaison between the school and maybe the church as the adult member of the family if the father is not inclined to participate. In summary, the black working class family also is an example of a household that has internalized the basic American values. Not being able to make a creative contribution through their work roles, black working class parents consider the rearing of respectable and well-behaved children as their major contribution to the community. They therefore emphasize the fact that they are stable, that they can be counted on, and that none in their household has been in trouble with public authorities. Black working class families with limited education and occupational opportunities are ingenious in their methods of coping, surviving, and overcoming adversity. This is the story of the black working class. Now on to black poor. The most important fact about poor black families is their low income status, and don't forget that. If they had as much money as you have, they wouldn't act like they act. And if you don't believe it, just give it to them. They therefore are forced to make a number of necessary, clever, and sometimes foolish arrangements to exist. These arrangements represent their rebellion against common goals and conventional ways of doing things in society. Because if the black poor did things in conventional ways, they wouldn't survive. So they do whatever they can do to survive. And these range from extended households consisting of several generations under one roof to taking in boarders or foster children for pay. Boyfriend-girlfriend relationships between adults often assume parental functions when children are involved, while the participants maintain their autonomy unfettered by marital bonds. Because every penny counts, poor households often do whatever they must do to bring the money in. Conventional practices of morality may be set aside for expedient arrangements that offer the hope of a livable existence. The struggle among poor black families is a struggle for existence. All else is secondary. Family income is near or under the official federal poverty line. Some families cannot survive without public welfare. The struggle is severe, and there is no margin for error. Poor black families learn to live with contingency. They hope for little and expect less. Parents love their children but seldom understand them. Men and women become sexually involved but are afraid to entrust their futures to each other. There is much disappointment. The parents in broken families sometimes have broken spirits, too broken to risk serious involvement with another mate and possibly another disappointment. For this reason, black lower-class parents often appear to be uncommitted to anyone or to anything when in actuality they are afraid to trust. Movement is constant, as if they were trying to get away from something, as if they would be caught by someone if they settled down, and they would. Jobs, houses, and communities are changed, and so are spouses and boyfriends or girlfriends. Unemployment is a constant specter. The women folk in the household usually find employment as maids and private household workers or in other service occupations that require few skills. The males are unskilled factory workers or maintenance men between periods of no work at all. Marriage may occur in an early age, as early as 16 years for some girls. First child may be born before the first marriage, or pregnancy may be the reason for marriage. Other children tend to come in rapid succession. Some families have as many as 8 or more children, while others are smaller. Religion is important for some poor families, but for others it is no more than a delusion. Those who attend church regularly are engulfed with religion. They affirm its saving grace and reward system after death. Some shy away from the church as one more disappointing promise that has copped out on the poor without helping. Poor blacks are seldom lukewarm about religion. They are either all for it or all against it, although the latter are reluctant to deny their children religious experience just in case there's more to it than realized. It is hard for a poor black family to overcome poverty. So much is lined up against it. If illness or unemployment do not drain away resources, there is a high probability that old age will. Let me summarize in what I have said for you about affluent working class and poor black families. Affluent black families tend to be nuclear households consisting of husband and wife and 2 or 3 children. Working class black families tend to be nuclear households too, consisting of husband and wife and children. However, the working class black family is likely to be larger with 5 or more children present. Also, there's a possibility that a relative or boarder may be part of the working class household too. Working class black families are broken more often than those that are affluent, with illness and death frequently among the reasons for the absence of the male spouse. Poor black families are likely to be one-parent households more often than are families in other class levels. Some are extended families consisting of grandmother, mother, and children. Among the poor, desertion and divorce are chief causes of family disruption. One-parent households are not always without a male presence, however. A boyfriend may visit frequently, help support the mother, and be attentive to her children. All blacks, affluent, working class, and poor, are so deeply involved in work that they seldom have much time for voluntary community activity. Nevertheless, there are some interesting variations by social class. Affluent black parents tend to be active participants in church affairs, mainstays of the Parent-Teacher Association or a school community group, and possibly members of a social club. Black working-class parents tend to attend church worship services regularly. The mother may periodically go to meetings of the school community group, and that is about all the family can do. Poor black families tend to be uninvolved in community affairs and may or may not be church members. Those who are faithful in church attendance are likely to be completely enveloped by the religious system, but many have no church affiliations and no other organized community organization. Visiting with family members and a few friends is about all they do as a leisure time activity outside the home. Thus, we see different and distinctive styles of life among blacks of different class levels associated with family composition, child rearing, and community participation. Now, in addition to the information we have derived about lifestyles of blacks, what in their way of life is a contribution to the society at large? Blacks, probably more than any other group, have shown the nation how to overcome the isolating, alienating, and debilitating effects of elitism. Back in the 1950s, Vance Packard called attention to the signs that pointed toward a more rigid class society in the United States. Particularly did he mention the tendency for people of different income levels to live in different residential areas and to limit their socializing to their own socioeconomic layer. He called it almost a caste situation. In the society at large, Vance Packard said, there is increasing compartmentalization, with affluent members tending to affiliate with mainline religious groups, enroll in proper private schools, belong to exclusive clubs, and live in fashionable neighborhoods. The affluent people who do this tend to look down on others from whom they have separated. Among blacks in the United States, their struggle to overcome the adversities of racial discrimination has made for more cooperation between the social classes. Writer William Robert Miller said that perhaps, and here I quote him, the most remarkable unsung achievement of Martin Luther King Jr. is how he made an ordinary congregation of middle-class blacks into a committed fellowship that became the backbone of a dangerous and demanding crusade for human dignity. In other words, King, and here again I quote to Miller, King took an average cross-section of people as he found them and brought out the best that was in them. He did this in black ghettos throughout the nation. Thus, the civil rights movement throughout the nation has been a model of the way to overcome social class alienation. As such, it is a benefit to all. Moreover, the heroic struggle between black men and black women to provide their family hope for the future has tended to overcome discrimination between the sexes with equalitarian models of family life. My studies of power and authority in family life reveal that the equalitarian pattern of interaction is the future goal for American households, and that whites are struggling with patriarchal and matriarchal residual patterns, but that blacks have embraced the equalitarian method more so than any other group in America. Again, their method of interaction, their equalitarian method of interaction within the family, is a model for many. What we are experiencing in our time, then, is the fulfillment of the prophecy of the social scientist Robert Merton of Columbia University, who said that it is not infrequently the case that the non-conforming minority represents the ultimate values of the society better than the conforming majority. Truly, the black family is America looking back at America, reflecting the possibilities of equality and cooperation instead of elitism and separation. Thank you very much. We tend to, when we speak of blacks, we tend to speak of poor people, and when we speak of whites, we tend to speak of affluent people. In my own research, I found there are poor whites, and there are middle-class whites, and there are affluent whites, and I found there are poor blacks, there are working-class blacks, and there are affluent blacks. And I did not come today to give a comparative analysis, but I can in the future as the situation unfolds. I would like to give a comparative analysis of affluent and blacks and whites, working class blacks and whites, and poor blacks and whites, because then that would begin to help us to understand some things. I would say that blacks in the Fitchburg area are like the blacks that I described. There are some here who are affluent, there are some here who are working class, and there are some here who are poor. And as I pointed out, that probably one of the most exciting roles in American society that everybody ought to take note of is the affluent black woman. I would say that of Fitchburg here. I'm sure that Fitchburg has bypassed some of its most magnificent models of living, and that is the affluent black women in our midst. I won't ask them to stand up and give testimonies as we did years ago, but that would be my judgment, that the Fitchburg population is not very much different from the population at large which I described. And it is very important, though, to think of it in terms of these various class levels, because, as I said, one of the great limitations in our race relations discussions is we think of blacks as poor and we think of whites as middle class, and therefore we are always comparing apples and oranges. But I've decided to compare apples and compare oranges and to compare pears. I won't tell you what are the pears. Yes. Yes.
I'm curious as to your reaction concerning the Reagan administration and the Republican policies of recent.
Well, I think Reagan needs to take some lessons from blacks. I think that the help relationships that have been a part of the black experience over the years has been a part of the American experience, and that is not a part of what we're getting coming out of Washington. We are getting the whole concern of every tub should sit on its own bottom, and that is not America. As a matter of fact, one of the basic theses that we have learned in social science is that you can help people only with people. There's no such thing as a self-reliant individual. I don't know where Americans got to thinking that they were able to make it on their own. Nobody can even guarantee one's own safety. I come and speak like this, but if we should have a race war right here, I couldn't get out of here free. I can count. So no one can guarantee one's safety, and yet the contemporary administration, and I would say that because I register as an independent, but I must say that the contemporary administration has forgotten the basic ethos of America of each one helping one. And that's going to spell our doom if we continue in this way. Now, since you've asked me to make a political statement, let me just elaborate a moment. It is very important for us to look at history. Most great nations that have finally been defeated were not defeated by an adversary. They were defeated from within. That is true of Germany. Germany was not defeated because it opened up a war both on the west and the east at the same time. Germany was defeated because it couldn't stand Jews. And you can't kill a portion of your population and still remain strong. Most nations that have ever been defeated were defeated not by the outside, but they were defeated by policies that finally made for internal collapse. That's why we have to be very careful in the United States that the 18% that we are spending for armaments may not be taking so much away from our own people that where we are harmed is not by Russia or China, but we may be harmed from within because of the internal collapse. If you look at the Roman Empire, if you will look at Great Britain, if you will look at Germany, you will find that that's how most great nations actually finally fall apart. They fall apart internally, sometimes because of what they have done externally. And just as I mentioned that no individual can guarantee his or her safety, that's true of a nation. Or anyone who reads, we got lots of books in this library about the Roman Empire. Last time I passed by, I thumbed through a few. We should take all of the books in here about the Roman Empire home and read about it carefully. And then after you finish reading about the Roman Empire and how it didn't survive, then we should read about Great Britain. And after we do that, then it might change the way that we have our priorities in the nation. So I'm very much disturbed about what's going on in Washington. It hasn't hurt me personally yet, but gee whiz, it's going to hurt the whole nation. And that's what's bothering me, because what hurts the whole nation eventually hurts all of us then. Yes?
I hate to throw any gloom on what you say about the cohesiveness of the black family, but I can't resist asking you to comment on the forces of divisiveness that have split black families and that tend to do. A good example was a recent television series that showed a black family starting to succeed. All of a sudden, the father was missing from the series because he started to look like he was acting like an American father. So I'd like to hear your comment on that.
Sure. I'm glad you raised that.
You gave such a beautiful presentation of how the cohesiveness of families held together and serves as a model of America. But I can't resist asking you to comment on the divisive things that have been done.
Well, obviously, within any population, there's a range. And one of the problems with we social scientists is we tend to look at the central tendencies and we don't look at the coefficients of variation. And that's very important. There is a range of behavior within all populations, black and white. That's number one. The other thing, though, which I would say before I speak directly to the issue you've raised, is that one of our great limitations in social science and in journalism, since most of us take our social science from journalists rather than from sociologists like Granger and me, one of our great difficulties in social science exploration is that we do not do comparative studies. And so blacks have now been saying that there is differentiation among blacks, and that is the thing that is getting in the way of blacks. Well, that's why I got through referring to you what Vance Packard had found. The great differentiation in American society by class is what has occurred among whites. And they're always trying to find new ways of getting away from other people. For example, there was a time that if you graduated from high school and had a diploma, you could go down to any university. You could even go down to Harvard. Most people don't know that it didn't turn into kind of an exclusive university until after Conant came there. If you had been a little older, you could have gotten in without any problems. The problem I'm trying to say is, years ago, if you got a high school diploma, you could go to college. And then all of a sudden, the elite decided, oh, too many people are getting those high school diplomas. Let's go down there and get the Educational Testing Service to throw a few tests in, and then we can flunk them. And of course, the elite made up the tests. And so therefore, we could keep people out that way. We've been finding more and more ways of keeping people out. So the greatest separation in America that has occurred has been a separation by social class, and probably the best manifestations of it have been found among whites. Blacks are beginning to be affluent, working class, and poor, and because this is so new, many black authors are beginning to say, oh, this means there's great separation between blacks. Yes, there are separations, but it's nothing of the magnitude of the separation among whites. This is because there haven't been comparative studies. That's issue number one. Issue number 2 is that the people have been writing books in Ms. Magazine where they write about whites and then they paint it black. And there's one black author who's been writing about the warfare between black men and black women. That is the craziest thing ever happened. Every black man that I have come across in my studies knows that if he doesn't do well to his woman, he's going to be in trouble. And that is not true among white men and white women. As a matter of fact, what has been going on in the middle class and white society has been one of the most shameful activities that has ever happened. And this is why white women are beginning to go to work. 55% incidentally of white women work now. Now back in 1920, about 40% of black women worked, but people like Moynihan said black women were disproportionately represented in the labor force. Why didn't he say white women are disproportionately underrepresented in the labor force? The point is, because black women worked, black women began to see that they had some power in their families and the husband couldn't make unilateral decisions. White women began to see that and they started going to work. And I want to tell the white men, the white women now are not going to take it anymore. They are helping pay for the family and they are going to have to be considered. You won't be able to take the next job in the next community and uproot the family simply because that's a way of getting ahead. Black men haven't been able to do that for years. They haven't been able to do that for years. They've been staying still over the years because the woman needed to have a job too. And they stayed still and they were able to stay near people who could help them. And one of the things that's going on in American families today is they've been uprooted following opportunities for the head of the household. So that's one kind of, one answer to you is to suggest that the estrangement that has been written about in the papers is not of the magnitude that one would be led. And one reason why it isn't is because I have discovered something else. I usually have white co-authors. And even some of my white co-authors are female. That gives me double ways of correcting myself. I have found that affluent people tend to write about the good things among the affluent and the bad things about the poor. There's a book out now by a woman by the name of Lillian Rubin called Worlds of Pain. It's a book about white working class people. Well, if you're working class and you're white, you know that everything that happens in white working class families is not painful. But here, when the middle-class white person writes about a working-class white person, they only see the negative things. The same thing happened with reference to the black family. Moynihan, who was white last time I saw him, wrote about the black family, and he talked about a case for national action is about to fall apart. And yet there was Robert Hill, who's black, used to be the research director for the Urban League. He wrote a book about black families called The Strengths of Black Families. What am I saying? If you want a good book about the black family, maybe you need Robert Hill and Moynihan together. If you want a good book about what's going on in working class families, you need to have a working class author and maybe an affluent author, and to put those together, you get the history. So the estrangement about blacks has really been basically material written by whites who look down and don't want to admit it among whites, and so they therefore point it to blacks and make them a scapegoat. That basically is my response, that there is estrangement between all people. But what I would say even further is this. I have looked at the statistics pertaining to two-parent and one-parent families. And this is what I have found, and it's true for each decade I've examined it. There is almost no difference between affluent black families and affluent white families in terms of the rate of one-parent families. As a matter of fact, 95% of black and white families are two-parent families among the affluent. As you go down the income scale, you begin to get a higher proportion of one-parent families among blacks and whites, and as you go to the bottom, you begin to get the highest proportion among blacks and whites. What you do find is a higher proportion of poor blacks who are one-parent than a higher than poor whites. Indicating that as you get to the end, you're experiencing a phenomenon of both classism and racism combined. The upshot of it is that there is estrangement in all populations, but my research tells me that the estrangement by social class is greater among whites and among blacks, and my research also tells me that the absence of equalitarian family life is greater among whites and among blacks, that the residual patriarchal and matriarchal family structures is probably more a white phenomenon than it is a black phenomenon. This is not to suggest that blacks are not beginning to act like whites.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. are indeed indebted to Dr. Willie for this excellent presentation, and the questions from the audience have been enlightening also. We thank you very much, and also we'd like to go on with our program further. Leonard Gaskins will now favor us again, accompanied by Erica Kraft. He will sing Steal Away by Boatner and Plenty Good Room from the Roland Hayes Songbook.
tell you the reason why. 'Cause if my Lord should call on me, I would be ready to die. Plenty good room, good room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room, just choose your seat in the house. Plenty good room, good room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room, just choose your seat and sit down. Plenty good room, good room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room, just choose your seat and sit down.
Again, Dr. Gaskins, Ms. Kraft, thank you very, very much for a wonderful presentation to us today. And now I'd like to call upon Arthur Kistner, Director of the Fitchburg Library, to sum up. And we thank you all for coming. It's been a beautiful, beautiful afternoon. Thank you again.
Well, I'll just sum up from here and thank the committee for doing a wonderful job of bringing Dr. Willie to us. I know the committee is planning a reception. Is that true, Beverly?
Yes, it is. We're going to have a reception in the youth library right beside us. Dr. Willie will be available for us to greet him, as will Mr. Kistner and Dr. Browning and Mr. Gaskins, hopefully. We'll have a reception shortly after this.
I just want to remind you that on the 2nd of May, we'll have a finished program here. I hope that all of you can join us at that time. Thank you very much for coming.